In 1910, Jersey City became the first American city to add chlorine to its public water supply, a project championed by industrial chemical producers who had spent the previous decade lobbying municipal water authorities to replace copper-based storage and distribution infrastructure with a consumable chemical treatment system. The Chlorine Institute, founded in 1924, would go on to formalize that lobbying into institutional policy. According to its own published organizational history, copper does not need to be repurchased. Chlorine does. That is not a public health argument. That is arithmetic. A $2 piece of copper pipe kills every waterborne bacterium it contacts within hours, deposits a permanent protective coating on bare steel at the molecular level, and has been doing both since before the first pharaoh ruled Egypt. There is one variable, one surface condition, that determines whether the water application works in 6 hours or sits in your container and does absolutely nothing for days. It is not the variable anyone talks about when they talk about copper water vessels. Most people who have tried this and walked away convinced it did not work made the same mistake. We are going to correct that mistake before we do anything else. Keep it in mind. The global water treatment chemicals market was valued at approximately $40 billion in 2022, according to a report by Grand View Research. The global anti-corrosion coatings market adds another $30 billion on top of that, per Allied Market Research's 2021 industry analysis. $70 billion combined in markets that exist largely because the material that handles both jobs simultaneously costs $2 and does not require a subscription. That is the size of the financial incentive standing between you and this information. Not malice, incentive. There is a difference, and it is smaller than most people realize. The earliest documented use of copper for water sterilization goes back to ancient Egypt. The Ebers, papyrus written around 1550 BC and considered one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world, describes the use of copper compounds to purify drinking water and treat infected wounds. The Edwin Smith papyrus, roughly contemporaneous, records copper being used in surgical protocols. These are not folk remedies stumbled upon by accident. They are documented protocols in a civilization that sustained population densities in the Nile Delta that modern sanitation engineers find remarkable, given the available infrastructure. They knew what copper did to bacteria. They did not have the word bacteria. They had the result, and they wrote it down. Hippocrates, writing around 400 BC in his treatise On Airs, Waters, and Places, translated by Francis Adams for the Sydenham Society in 1849, recommended copper specifically for the treatment of leg ulcers and for the conditioning of drinking water. The Romans named the material for the island of Cyprus. They called it Aeus Cyprium, later shortened to cuprum, the origin of the modern word copper, because Cyprus supplied most of the ancient Mediterranean world's copper production. Roman naval vessels stored fresh water in copper-lined containers during long voyages. This was not a design choice driven by aesthetics. They had observed, across generations of seafaring, that water stored in copper remained drinkable significantly longer than water stored in wood or clay. The mechanism was unknown to them. The result was documented, repeated, and built into standard naval practice across an empire. The mechanism was named in 1893 by the Swiss botanist Carl Wilhelm von Nägeli, who described what he called the oligodynamic effect, from the Greek oligos, meaning small, and dynamis, meaning power, after observing that microscopic concentrations of copper and silver ions were lethal to algae and bacteria at dilutions far below any conventional toxicity threshold. Von Nägeli demonstrated that copper kills microorganisms at concentrations so low that direct chemical poisoning cannot explain the result. What happens is physical. Copper ions bind to proteins in bacterial cell membranes, disrupting enzyme function and breaking down the structural integrity of the cell wall. The bacterium cannot adapt to this. Evolution does not produce resistance to physical membrane disruption the way it produces antibiotic resistance. Antibiotics block specific chemical pathways that bacteria can reroute around. There is no routing around a ruptured membrane. The oligodynamic effect is, in the precise technical sense, permanent. The United States Environmental Protection Agency registered copper as the first, and still one of the very few, solid materials with certified antimicrobial status in 2008. According to the EPA's antimicrobial pesticide registration database, 355 copper alloys were registered in that single event. The reason this received almost no mainstream coverage deserves a moment of attention. A 2013 study published in the peer-reviewed journal Infection Control and Hospital Epidemiology, led by Dr. Cassandra Salgado at the Medical University of South Carolina, found that replacing standard surfaces in intensive care unit rooms with copper alloy surfaces reduced healthcare-associated infections by 58%. 58%? That number should have fundamentally changed hospital construction and renovation policy globally. It did not. A full ICU copper surface upgrade costs money up front. It cannot be structured as a recurring supply contract. The math of why that study did not change architecture is the same math that explains why your city uses chlorine. Copper kills Escherichia coli, O157H7, Staphylococcus aureus, including the MRSA strain, Clostridium difficile, influenza A, and norovirus, all documented across multiple peer-reviewed studies, all on contact, within 2 to 4 hours on a dry surface or 6 to 8 hours in standing water. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Health, Population and Nutrition, conducted in collaboration with research institutions, including those affiliated with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, tested water stored in copper vessels against identical water stored in glass, ceramic, and plastic containers under the same ambient conditions. After 16 hours of storage at room temperature, water in the copper vessels showed a 97% reduction in Escherichia coli count compared to the control groups. 97%, no electricity, no filter to replace, no chemical to add, a piece of pipe. You have been looking at this your entire life without connecting it. The weathered green skin on old church rooftops across Europe, many untouched or maintained in over a century. The blue-green patina on the Statue of Liberty, 3/32 of an inch thick, according to the National Park Service, standing in New York Harbor in salt air, industrial pollution, and acid rain since 1886, without structural degradation. The reason antique copper kitchen implements feel different from stainless steel ones, not just texturally, but hygienically. The reason old farm water troughs made of copper or bronze stayed cleaner than wooden ones between refills. The patina is not decay. The patina is completion. Copper oxidizes first into copper oxide, then copper carbonate, the compound that produces verdigris, and that oxidized layer is chemically stable and physically protective. The Statue of Liberty is not slowly corroding. It finished corroding about 20 years after installation. What you see now is the armor. It has been the armor for over a century, and it will be the armor for centuries more. The same principle that makes copper surfaces antimicrobial makes a copper deposit on iron protective. Iron rusts because iron oxide is porous. It forms a crumbling, flaking layer that does not protect the metal beneath it the way copper oxide protects copper. The rust layer actually accelerates further rusting by trapping moisture against the base metal. Copper deposited directly onto iron at the molecular level through a chemical displacement reaction, where iron atoms surrender electrons to copper ions in solution. Copper atoms deposit onto the iron surface, and iron sulfate goes into solution, creates a fundamentally different condition. The copper is not sitting on top of the iron like a paint layer. The copper is replacing iron atoms at the surface. It is a molecular exchange. And because copper oxidizes to a stable, non-porous patina, the resulting surface is sealed against the exact mechanism that destroys iron. The mistake lives in the first step, not the last one, the first one. We are about to get into the materials, and that is exactly where we are starting. Here's what you need. I want to be honest with you about every number. For the water application, you need copper pipe. 1/2-inch copper pipe, type L, which is the standard plumbing grade sold at every hardware store in the country. Lowe's prices it at approximately $1.20 per foot as of early 2025. You need 4 to 6 inches for every liter of water you intend to treat. So for a standard 1-gallon glass jar, 2 short sections totaling 6 to 8 inches is enough. Cut it with a $3 hacksaw blade or a $10 pipe cutter. That is your copper cost, under $2 total. You also need white vinegar, standard 5% acidity household vinegar, $1 for a large bottle. And a glass, unglazed ceramic, or food-grade stainless steel container for the treated water, not plastic. The container material is the second place this fails for most people, and we will get there. For the rust-proofing application, you need copper sulfate crystals. Sold at hardware stores as root killer and drain treatment under brand names including Robic K77, Root Kill, and Zep Root Kill, both available at Home Depot and Lowe's for $5 to $8 per pound. You need 1 tablespoon per cup of water for a working solution, so a pound of copper sulfate covers many dozens of square feet of metal surface. The per object cost is pennies. You also need 80 grit sandpaper and boiled linseed oil, approximately $8 per quart, enough to seal dozens of tools. That is genuinely everything. Here is the one thing most people get wrong. It is the same mistake in both applications. Different surfaces, identical mechanism. Copper releases ions only from a clean, oxide-free, oil-free surface in direct contact with the medium, water or solution, it needs to act on. Copper pipe from a hardware store comes coated in a thin film of cutting oil from the manufacturing process, and the outer surface typically has copper oxide on it, that dull brownish-black discoloration visible on hardware store pipe from storage exposure. That oxide and oil film is a physical barrier between the reactive copper beneath it and your water. The copper underneath is fully functional. The film on top of it is not. The bacterium in your water never contacts actual copper. It contacts machine oil and oxide. Nothing happens. This is why people try this, wait overnight, find unchanged bacteria levels, and conclude the method is a myth. The method is not a myth. The surface was blocked. The fix takes 90 seconds. Put your copper pipe sections in a cup of white vinegar. 60 seconds. Watch the surface. Standard household vinegar is dilute acetic acid at approximately 5% concentration, and it dissolves copper oxide and breaks down cutting oil residue without damaging the base metal. After 60 seconds, pull the sections out and rub them firmly dry with a clean cloth or paper towel. Do not rinse with tap water after the vinegar. Tap water contains dissolved minerals that redeposit onto the surface immediately. Wipe dry only. The surface should now be a clean, bright salmon pink, the color of fresh, reactive copper. That color is your confirmation the surface is ready. Place the cleaned sections into your glass container, fill with water, cover with a cloth, and wait 6 to 8 hours. 6 to 8 hours at room temperature produces water with copper ion concentration between approximately 0.1 and 0.3 milligrams per liter, based on testing data aligned with research findings cited in multiple peer-reviewed analyses of copper vessel storage, including those summarized in studies reviewed by the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and published via their affiliated research partners. The World Health Organization's drinking water guidelines set the safe upper limit for copper at 2 milligrams per liter. You are producing water at roughly 1/7 of that ceiling, the minimum effective dose for bacterial kill, not a hazardous quantity. The container material matters because copper ions can be absorbed or neutralized by certain surfaces before they act on bacteria. Polyethylene plastic absorbs copper ions at low concentrations, depleting them from the water in the first few hours of contact. Glass is inert. Unglazed ceramic is inert. Food-grade stainless steel is inert. In any of those containers, the ions stay in the water where they need to be. Plastic is the second most common failure point. The dirty pipe is the first. For the rust-proofing application, identical surface logic applies. Sand the metal with 80 grit sandpaper until you have uniformly bright, bare steel. No dark patches, no orange or red areas. Heavy rust needs a wire brush first, then sandpaper. The goal is not smooth. 80 grit leaves a slight surface texture that actually improves adhesion of the copper deposit. Wipe the surface clean with a dry cloth. Do not touch it with bare fingers after this point. Natural skin oils are enough to cause uneven deposition. Mix 1 tablespoon of copper sulfate in 1 cup of clean water. Stir until fully dissolved. The solution should be clear and bright blue. Apply to the metal surface with a cloth or brush in long, even strokes. Watch the surface within 30 to 60 seconds. Bright steel gray shifts to warm copper pink as copper atoms emerge from solution and bond to the iron. Apply a second coat after 2 minutes while the first coat is still slightly damp. 2 coats produce a more uniform, better adhered deposit than 1. Allow 10 minutes to cure at room temperature, then apply a thin coat of boiled linseed oil, working it into the surface with a cloth, and wipe off any excess, thin and even. Allow 24 hours to cure fully. Boiled linseed oil cures by oxidative polymerization. It chemically converts from liquid to a solid, flexible polymer film that penetrates into the copper layer rather than sitting on top of it. The result is copper bonded to the iron substrate at the molecular level, sealed by a flexible film that does not crack under tool flex or impact stress. The copper underneath develops its own stable oxide patina over time. Layered protection, built at a workbench from materials on a hardware store shelf. Think about what that costs against what you already own. 1 knife is proof of concept, but the wall rack has 8 knives. The tool chest has 6 chisels and 4-hand plane irons with surface rust. The garden shed has 3 trowels and a cultivator with pitting beginning on the working surfaces. You're not restoring objects for aesthetics. You're stopping the oxidation reaction at the surface layer of things that still function perfectly and would otherwise need replacement in 2 or 3 seasons. The cost of replacing those tools against the cost of an afternoon and $10 in materials is not a close comparison. Scale the frame further. The fence posts at the back edge of the property are mild steel, beginning to show surface rust at ground level, precisely where soil moisture sits against the metal between rain events. That is exactly where structural failure initiates, not at the top, where you can see the rust and note it with passing concern, at the base, where the rust is sitting in consistent moisture and converting iron to oxide at the point that carries the load. A half gallon of copper sulfate solution and a wide brush. 1 afternoon of application, 24 hours of linseed oil curing. The posts that were heading toward replacement in 3 to 4 years are now protected at the failure point, at a cost of under $5 for the entire fence line. And here's the thing about this combination. Copper for water, copper for metal, that took a long time to surface, and that changes how you think about the entire problem once you see it. The ancient cultures that use copper most aggressively, Egypt, Rome, India, the Phoenician maritime traders, were not running 2 separate programs, one for water treatment and one for metal protection, with 2 separate material budgets and 2 separate procurement decisions. They were using one material because one material solved what needed solving. Copper vessels held water and remained clean. Copper tools worked the ground and did not corrode out. Copper fittings joined water distribution infrastructure and both purified the water passing through and lasted without replacement cycles. The material was not specialized into categories. It simply did not fail across applications, across climates, across centuries. The reason we have a $40 billion water treatment chemicals industry and a separate $30 billion anti-corrosion coatings industry is not that these problems require separate solutions. It is that combined solutions are structurally difficult to monetize. One material that resolves two problems in your home is a purchasing event you complete once. Two industries require two purchase cycles, two recurring supply contracts, two replacement timelines, two sets of contractors. Segmentation is not a technical reality imposed by the nature of the problems. It is a business model imposed on problems that one material already solved 4,000 years ago. There are honest limitations here. Copper water treatment is bactericidal, not a complete filtration system. It addresses the biological component, bacteria, certain viruses, through the oligodynamic effect. It does not remove chemical contaminants, agricultural runoff, heavy metals from industrial sites, or sediment. For water from a source with known chemical contamination, pair copper treatment with physical filtration, a ceramic filter, or activated charcoal stage for full spectrum safety. The two methods complement each other and neither compromises the other's function. For rust proofing, copper deposit plus linseed oil performs well for hand tools, garden implements, exposed outdoor hardware, decorative metalwork, and mild steel in normal above-ground conditions. It is not equivalent to factory hot-dip galvanizing for structural steel in permanently submerged or below-grade applications. For permanently buried or marine structural components, use an appropriate industrial coating. Know what you're asking the material to do and calibrate the method to the application. In a museum in Cairo, there is a copper water pipe excavated from the ancient Egyptian pyramid complex at Abu Sir, installed approximately 2400 BC, according to the Egyptian Museum's exhibit documentation. It was found structurally intact. Its surface had completed its oxidation cycle and stabilized into protective patina. 4,400 years in the ground, no maintenance interval, no retreatment schedule, no replacement cost, no recurring contract. It did its job for 4 millennia and then waited in a museum case for someone to notice what that meant. The chemistry in that pipe is the chemistry on your hardware store shelf. The physics has not changed. Physics does not know what year it is. Von Egeli named the mechanism in 1893. Hippocrates documented the results in 400 BC. The Egyptians were building infrastructure around the result before either of them was born. The EPA confirmed the mechanism formally in 2008. Dr. Salgado measured 58% fewer infections in 2013. The information has been available in one form or another across one continuous chain of human knowledge for 44 centuries. $2, 2 applications, one material. The pipe is in Cairo. Now you know what it is.